Chapter 1. Whispers on the Rooftop. The city buzzed far below, a dull roar of forgotten promises and broken dreams. Up here, on the forgotten rooftop of an abandoned office building, the world felt quieter, colder, free. Ilara pulled her coat tighter around her body, the chill of midnight slicing through the thin fabric. Her heart still thundered in her chest, leftover adrenaline from the argument that had sent her storming out of her apartment without a second thought. She didn't know where she was going. She just knew she had to get away. The steel ladder behind her rattled in the wind. She had climbed it without thinking, driven by some instinct she couldn't explain. An aching need to be above it all, even if only for a few stolen minutes. She moved closer to the edge, peering down at the endless sprawl of glittering lights. From here, the chaos of her life seemed smaller, manageable even. And then she heard it, a low, almost imperceptible cough. Ilara froze. I think someone else was up here. Her instincts screamed at her to run, to disappear back down the ladder and into the night. But her feet remained rooted to the spot, her fingers curling into fists at her sides. From the shadows at the far end of the rooftop, a figure emerged. He was tall, wrapped in a dark jacket, his hands shoved deep into his pockets. His hair was a mess of black waves that caught the moonlight, casting an almost ethereal glow around him. There was a tension in the way he moved, as if he were ready to spring into action at any second. His eyes, shadowed and unreadable, locked onto hers. Neither of them spoke. The moment stretched, electric and uncertain, until he finally broke the silence with a voice rough from disuse. "Didn't think anyone else knew about this place," he said, his lips twitching into the ghost of a smile. And Lara found her own voice, brittle and thin. "I could say the same." The stranger chuckled, a low, dangerous sound that sent a shiver down her spine. "Guess we're both running from something." She didn't answer. Couldn't, because the truth of it lodged like a stone in her throat. She was running. From mistakes she couldn't undo, from people she couldn't trust, from a version of herself she barely recognized anymore. "You got a name?" he asked after a beat, taking a step closer. Ilara hesitated. Everything inside her screamed that this was a bad idea, that he was a bad idea. But God, she was so tired of being the good girl, the predictable one, the one who always played it safe. She smiled, a slow, defiant curve of her lips, and lied, without hesitation. "Arya," she said. He studied her for a long moment, then nodded, as if he could see right through the falsehood but didn't care enough to call her out. "Call me Jack," he said, offering a name she immediately knew wasn't real either. Another gust of wind whipped between them, carrying the unspoken agreement in its icy fingers. Tonight, they would be strangers. Tonight, they could be anyone they wanted. Arya moved to sit on the low stone ledge that ringed the rooftop, her legs dangling dangerously over the side. Jack followed, stopping a few feet away, close enough that she could see the faint scar slicing through his left eyebrow. They talked about nothing and everything. Music, dreams, cities they wanted to disappear into. Each word peeling back another layer, yet revealing nothing true. The tension between them was palpable, simmering just beneath the surface. Every glance, every accidental brush of fingers as he handed her the flask he pulled from his jacket. Every too long pause in the conversation. It built slowly, deliciously, like a fire fed by careful hands. By the time the clock struck 1, the distance between them had all but vanished. Jack's voice was a murmur, rough with some emotion she didn't dare name. "You ever just want to forget who you are?" he asked. Ilara's heart twisted. "Every damn day," she whispered. Their eyes met. A collision of loneliness and longing, and for a moment, the world stopped spinning. Jack's hand lifted, hesitant at first, brushing a stray strand of hair from her cheek. His touch was feather light, but it scorched her all the same, sending sparks dancing down her spine. She should have pulled away. She should have run. Instead, she leaned into him, her breath catching as his fingers traced the line of her jaw. "Your trouble," he said, his voice low and wrecked. "So are you," she breathed. And when he kissed her, fierce and claiming, it wasn't gentle. It was a collision of broken souls, a desperate attempt to drown out the pain, if only for a little while. The rooftop faded. The city below blurred. All that existed was the fire roaring to life between them. But somewhere, buried deep in the back of her mind, a warning flickered. Nothing good comes from midnight temptations. And nothing hidden stays buried forever. Chapter 2. Dina. A name written in smoke. The morning after tasted like regret. Ilara jolted awake, the rough concrete of the rooftop digging into her palms. A thin mist clung to the air, softening the harsh edges of the city skyline. For a moment, she forgot where she was, forgot who she was, and let herself exist in the space between dream and reality. Then she remembered. The kiss, the way Jack's hands had threaded through her hair, how his mouth had claimed hers like a man starving for salvation. The way she had kissed him back, surrendering every last shred of common sense. She sat up quickly, heart pounding. The rooftop was empty. He was gone. A ridiculous pang of disappointment curled in her stomach, tightening until it was hard to breathe. She wrapped her arms around her knees, feeling foolish and exposed under the pale light of dawn. Had it even meant anything to him? Was she just another midnight mistake? The questions gnawed at her, ugly and sharp, but she shoved them aside. It didn't matter. It wasn't supposed to matter. This wasn't real. It couldn't be. The sound of crunching gravel startled her. Ilara spun around, and there he was. Jack. He was carrying 2 steaming paper cups, his dark jacket rumpled, a scowl carved into his face as if he'd fought every instinct to come back. When he caught her staring, something shifted in his expression, something almost vulnerable. He crossed the rooftop and handed her a cup without a word. Coffee. Bitter and too hot, exactly what she needed. "Didn't think you'd still be here," Jack muttered, sitting beside her with a grunt. His thigh brushed hers, a casual touch that sent heat pooling low in her belly. "I could say the same," she said, her voice rough. For a while, they sipped their coffee in silence, the world waking up around them. Finally, Jack spoke, his voice low and careful. "You're not just running from a bad breakup, are you?" Ilara stiffened. The lie, the one she had carefully constructed, teetered on the tip of her tongue. But something in his gaze, a mirror of her own pain, made her hesitate. "I'm running from everything," she said finally. Jack gave a soft, humorless laugh. "Yeah, me too." Another beat of silence stretched between them. "Where would you go?" she asked, surprising herself. He didn't answer right away. His eyes drifted to the horizon, where the first rays of sunlight bled into the sky. "Somewhere, no one knows my name," he said. His knuckles whitened around the coffee cup. somewhere I can start over. Ilara swallowed, her throat dry. And if your past finds you? Jack's mouth twisted into a grim smile. It always does. The finality in his tone sent a chill down her spine. She wanted to ask, "What exactly are you running from, Jack?" But she didn't. She couldn't. Because if she asked, she would owe him her truth, too. Instead, she offered him a fragile smile and said, "Maybe we can both be nobodies for a while." Jack looked at her then, really looked at her, and whatever he saw there made something in him crack. "Yeah," he said hoarsely, "maybe we can." And just like that, the fragile thread between them tightened. A dangerous, intoxicating connection neither could afford, yet neither could walk away from. He stood, offering his hand. She took it without thinking, his touch warm and steady against her cold fingers. "Come on," Jack said, tugging her to her feet, "before someone calls the cops on 2 trespassers." She laughed, a rusty, broken sound, and let him lead her down the fire escape. They disappeared into the waking city together, 2 strangers chasing a dream spun from smoke and lies. Neither noticed the figure watching them from across the street. Neither felt the camera click quietly, capturing their escape. Neither realized that their fragile, reckless connection had just lit the fuse to something much bigger and much more dangerous. Chapter 3. Shadows that Follow. The city during daylight felt like a different world. Ilara pulled the brim of her hat lower, shrinking into her oversized hoodie as she wove through the bustling crowds. Jack walked beside her, keeping just enough distance to not draw attention, but close enough that she could feel his presence like a phantom brush against her skin. They hadn't said much since leaving the rooftop. Every glance, every brush of hands, said what words couldn't. They weren't safe, not from the city, not from themselves, and certainly not from the pasts chasing their shadows. Jack led her to a hole-in-the-wall diner tucked between 2 crumbling buildings, the kind of place no one would think to look for them, the kind of place that didn't ask questions. Inside, it smelled like burnt coffee and regret. Ilara slid into a booth by the window, nervously fidgeting with the cracked vinyl seat. Jack ordered 2 black coffees from a grumpy waitress, who didn't even glance at them. "No," he said once they were alone again, his voice low. "What's your next move?" Ilara stared out the window, watching strangers blur past. What was her next move? She hadn't planned further than escaping last night's chaos, hadn't thought about what came after. "I don't know," she admitted. "Keep moving, I guess." Jack nodded, like he understood that better than anyone. "You can crash at my place, just for a few days." The offer hung between them, heavy with implication. She should say no. She should run the other way. But the thought of being alone, vulnerable, was so much worse. "Okay," she said, voice barely above a whisper. Jack's jaw tightened. Relief or regret, she couldn't tell. He reached across the table, brushing her fingers with his own in a fleeting touch that sent a shiver racing up her arm. "I'll keep you safe," he said. It sounded like a vow he shouldn't be making, a promise she shouldn't believe. And yet, she wanted to believe it. Desperately, they left the diner an hour later, slipping into the growing crowds. Jack's apartment wasn't far, a few blocks down a quieter side street. But as they turned the corner, Ilara felt, that prickling sensation along the back of her neck, like unseen eyes drilling into her spine. She stopped walking, scanning the street. Cars honked in the distance. A man argued with a street vendor over a hot dog. A woman struggled with a stroller. Normal. So normal, it felt wrong. Jack noticed her hesitation immediately. You okay? Elara frowned, heart thudding. I saw it. Movement in the corner of her eye made her whip around. A man in a dark hoodie ducked into a side alley. Too fast, too deliberate. Someone's following us, she whispered. Jack didn't ask how she knew. He just grabbed her hand, rough and urgent, and pulled her into a sprint. They ducked down side streets and alleys, weaving a chaotic path through the city. Every step, Ilara's fear climbed higher. Every glance over her shoulder made her heart squeeze painfully. Finally, Jack yanked her into an abandoned parking garage, pressing her back against the cold concrete wall. His body blocked hers from view, his chest heaving with exertion. Stay quiet, he breathed against her ear. His scents, clean soap, leather, danger, wrapped around her, drowning out everything else. Footsteps echoed through the garage. Closer, closer. Ilara's fingers clutched the front of Jack's jacket, trembling. The figure appeared at the far end. A tall man, face shadowed under a baseball cap. He prowled through the garage, scanning every corner. Jack's muscles coiled, ready to strike. Ilara's heart nearly exploded when the man turned and looked right at them. Chapter 4. Close enough to break. For a second, one terrible, endless second, Ilara was sure the man had spotted them. Jack's hand tightened against her side, a silent command. Don't move, don't breathe. She obeyed, heart pounding like a war drum against her ribs. The man hesitated, his head tilted slightly as if sensing something just out of sight. Jack shifted subtly, pressing closer to her. His body all but enveloped hers now, shielding her completely from view. Ilara could feel the strength coiled in him, the tension vibrating through his muscles. His breath was warm against her temple. If she wasn't so terrified, she might have noticed how right it felt, how dangerously right. The man muttered something under his breath, then turned away. Footsteps retreated, fading into the distant hum of the city. Still, Jack didn't move. Neither did she. For a long moment, they simply stood there, bodies locked together, the danger ebbing but refusing to leave entirely. Finally, Jack pulled back just enough to look at her. You okay? He whispered, his voice rough and low. Ilara nodded shakily. Yeah, I think so. But she wasn't okay. Nothing about this was okay. She was on the run with a man she barely knew, being chased by shadows she didn't understand, and every instinct she had was screaming that this was a mistake. A beautiful, exhilarating mistake she couldn't stop herself from making. Jack's thumb brushed lightly against her jaw, a tender, almost reverent touch that stole her breath. His gaze burned into hers, so intense she had to fight the urge to look away. I won't let anything happen to you, he said. A promise. Another dangerous promise. Before she could respond, Jack took her hand and led her deeper into the parking garage, moving fast but silent. They emerged onto a side street, and after several tense minutes of walking, they finally reached his apartment. It was a third-floor unit in an aging brick building, the kind of place people passed by without a second glance. Safe, invisible. Jack unlocked the door with a quick glance over his shoulder, then ushered her inside. Ilara immediately noted the Spartan decor. Bare walls, minimal furniture, nothing personal. No photos, no souvenirs. Just a few essentials and a worn leather jacket draped over a chair. It was the home of a man who never intended to stay anywhere for long. Jack double-locked the door behind them and pulled the blinds closed. Only then did he finally let his shoulders sag, the tension bleeding from him in visible waves. Ilara hovered near the door, unsure what to do with herself. "Sit," Jack said, his voice softer now. She moved automatically, perching on the edge of the battered sofa. Jack disappeared into the kitchen and returned with a glass of water, pressing it into her hands. Their fingers brushed, sending a spark through her, so sharp it almost hurt. "Thanks," she said, her voice small. He sat across from her, studying her with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. "You're good at this," she said before she could stop herself. Jack's mouth twisted into something that wasn't quite a smile. "At running?" "Yeah. I've had practice." Ilara licked her lips, choosing her next words carefully. "Who was that man?" Jack leaned back, his eyes shuddering. "Someone looking for me." He didn't offer more. She didn't push. Instead, she said, "I have people looking for me, too." The confession slipped out, raw and unguarded. Jack's brows furrowed, but he didn't press for details. Instead, he reached forward, his fingers brushing hers again, grounding her. "You're safe here," he said. She wanted to believe him. God, she wanted to. But part of her knew deep down, that nowhere was truly safe anymore. Not from her secrets. Not from his. Not even from each other. The silence stretched between them, heavy with things unspoken. Jack's thumb stroked the back of her hand in a slow, hypnotic rhythm. Not demand, not asking, was there? And somehow that was worse. Because it made her want to break, to lean into him, to tell him everything. Instead, she asked the question that had been burning a hole in her mind since the rooftop. "Jack, is that even your real name?" He smiled then, a slow, dangerous smile that made her breath hitch. "No," he said, "and neither is yours." Ilara's heart skipped a beat. They were two liars in a house of cards, and the first breeze had already begun to blow. Somewhere deep inside, she knew. This wasn't the beginning of a love story. It was the start of something much darker. Chapter 5. Lies between the sheets. Jack's answer hung in the air like smoke. "No, and neither is yours." Ilara swallowed hard, her fingers tightening around the glass of water she hadn't touched. Of course he knew. He wasn't stupid. He probably saw through her from the moment she opened her mouth. Yet he hadn't asked, hadn't demanded her real name or her real story. He just accepted the lie she wore like armor. Jack stood then, moving toward the small kitchen with restless energy. He pulled open a drawer, rummaging through a mess of mismatched utensils and papers until he found a battered first aid kit. Ilara frowned. "You hurt?" Jack shook his head. "You are?" She glanced down and realized there was a gash across her palm, raw and angry from when she scraped it during their escape. She hadn't even noticed through the rush of adrenaline. Jack returned to her side, kneeling in front of her. Without a word, he took her hand in his touch maddeningly gentle. He cleaned the wound with careful strokes, his brows furrowed in concentration. Ilara studied him while he worked. The scar near his temple, the faint bruise along his jaw, the roughness in his hands that spoke of too many fights and too many nights spent surviving rather than living. Who was this man? And, more dangerously, why did she want him to keep touching her? Jack wrapped her hand in clean gauze, smoothing the edges with a tenderness that made her heart ache. When he finished, he didn't let go. His thumb brushed over her knuckles, slow and deliberate. "You're bleeding in more ways than one," he said quietly, his voice a rasp of velvet and smoke. Her breath caught. "Jack?" she whispered. Warning or plea, she wasn't sure. His eyes locked onto hers, something raw and hungry swirling in their depths. "I know we're both lying," he said. "I know this is stupid, dangerous." He leaned closer, so close she could feel the heat of him, smell the salt of his skin. But right now I need something real. Ilara didn't know who moved first, him or her. Maybe it didn't matter. One moment, they were breathing the same ragged air. The next, their mouths collided in a kiss that burned straight through her chest. Jack kissed like a man who had nothing left to lose. Fierce, desperate, utterly consuming. Ilara responded with equal desperation, fisting her good hand in the front of his shirt, dragging him closer. She needed this, needed him, needed to forget the world outside for just a little while. Jack lifted her easily, carrying her to the worn couch without breaking the kiss. His hands were everywhere, cradling her jaw, sliding down her sides, anchoring her to him, as if afraid she'd disappear. Clothes didn't come off all at once. They peeled away like secrets, one by one, until there was nothing left but skin and breath, and the frantic pounding of two hearts slamming together. When he finally pressed into her, Ilara gasped, the world tilting wildly. Jack whispered her name, not her real name, but the one she'd given him, against her throat, and Ilara closed her eyes, letting herself drown in it, letting herself believe, for just a moment, that she wasn't broken, that she wasn't hunted, that she could still feel something pure. They moved together in a rhythm as old as time, clinging to each other as if the world outside would shatter them the moment they let go. When release came, it wasn't just physical. It was a break, a healing, a surrender. Afterward, Jack gathered her against him, his hands tracing lazy patterns along her spine. His touch was gentle now, almost reverent. Ilara buried her face in his chest, breathing him in. Sleep. Why? For the first time in months, she wasn't running. Not from the past. Not from herself. At least, not yet. Hours later, long after the city had gone to sleep, Jack whispered into her hair. "I don't know your real name," he said, "and you don't know mine." Ilara's heart thudded painfully. "But when the time comes," Jack continued, his voice a low vow, "I'll tell you everything." She wanted to believe him. God, she wanted to believe so badly. But somewhere deep inside she knew secrets like theirs didn't stay buried. They rose up like ghosts. They clawed their way out of the dark. And when that happened, love wouldn't be enough to save them. Chapter 6. Past Lives, Present Lies. The next morning, the illusion shattered. Ilara woke, tangled in the sheets, Jack's arm draped over her waist. His breathing was slow, steady, warm against the back of her neck. For a moment, she let herself believe in the fantasy, that they were just two normal people, safe and free. But the moment didn't last. A sharp knock rattled the apartment door, followed by a second, harder bang. Ilara jolted upright, heart hammering. Jack was instantly awake, swinging out of bed with a fluid grace that spoke of a life lived ready for danger. He grabbed a pair of jeans from the floor and pulled them on with quick, economical movements. Another knock, this one louder, more insistent. Jack pressed a finger to his lips, signaling for her to stay quiet. Barefoot and shirtless, he padded silently to the door. He peered through the peephole, his body stiffening instantly. Ilara slid off the bed, grabbing her clothes in frantic silence. She yanked her hoodie over her head and moved toward the tiny kitchen, scanning for anything she could use as a weapon. Jack turned from the door, his face grim. "Tomorrow." "He found us," he said, voice low. Before she could ask who, the door shook under a heavy blow. "Jack," a voice called from the hallway. "Rough. Male. Open the damn door." Jack cursed under his breath. Ilara grabbed a heavy skillet from the counter, clutching it tight enough to whiten her knuckles. "Get in the bathroom," Jack ordered. "Lock the door. Don't come out until I say." "I'm not leaving you," she whispered fiercely. Jack crossed the room in 2 strides, cupping her face in his hands. His touch was surprisingly gentle for a man who looked ready for war. "You have to," he said. "Trust me." Another slam shook the door. This time it cracked at the hinges. No time for arguments. Ilara bolted for the bathroom, heart in her throat. She locked the door and pressed her ear against it, straining to hear. The front door crashed open. Bootsteps thundered inside. "Where is she, Jack?" the voice snarled. "I don't know what you're talking about," Jack said, his tone icy. "You're lying," the man said. "You always were a lousy liar." There was a sound of scuffling. A crash. A grunt of pain. Ilara pressed a hand to her mouth to muffle her gasp. Her body shook with adrenaline. She knew she should stay hidden. Knew Jack needed her to stay safe. But she couldn't just sit here. She cracked the bathroom door open, just enough to see. 2 men were inside the apartment, both big, both armed. One had Jack pinned against the wall, a knife pressed against his throat. The other was tearing through the apartment, tossing furniture aside in a frenzy. "You're going to tell us where the girl is," the first man said, pressing the blade harder against Jack's skin. A thin line of blood welled up. Ilara's vision narrowed. Red. Ray. Without thinking, she moved. She crept into the kitchen, skillet raised high. When the second man turned toward her, she struck. The skillet connected with his head with a sickening crack. He stumbled backward, cursing, grabbing at his temple. Jack seized the distraction. He slammed his elbow into the man holding him, knocking the knife loose. In the next instant, Jack had the knife in his own hand, flipping it expertly. The fight was brutal, messy. Jack moved like a man who had been fighting his whole life. Precise, efficient, merciless. He disabled the first attacker with a savage twist of the blade, sending him sprawling to the floor. The second man lunged for Ilara, but Jack intercepted him, slamming him into the wall with bone-jarring force. Panting, Jack yanked Ilara toward him. "We have to go," he growled. "Now." No arguments. No second chances. They burst out of the apartment, racing down the stairs 2 at a time. Out into the blinding sunlight. Into the crowd. Ranin. Nadine. They didn't stop until they reached the abandoned train yards on the edge of the city. Breathless, heart-slamming, they collapsed behind a rusted freight car, hidden from view. Jack leaned his forehead against the metal, his whole body trembling with restrained fury. "Who were they?" Ilara gasped. Jack didn't look at her. "My past," he said bitterly. "The part I thought I left behind." Ilara touched his arm. He flinched, just slightly, then relaxed under her hand. "You're not the only one with ghosts," she whispered. Jack turned then, his eyes burning into hers. "You have no idea what I've done," he said. "If you knew, you wouldn't be here." Ilara stepped closer, until there was barely an inch between them. "I don't care," she said fiercely. "Whatever you're running from, whatever you've done, it doesn't change this." She pressed her hand against his chest, feeling the frantic beat of his heart. Jack closed his eyes, his jaw clenching tight. "You should," he said. "You should care." "I don't," she whispered, and then she kissed him. Hard, desperate, pouring all her fear and fury and hope into that kiss. Jack responded instantly, crushing her against him, their mouths colliding with bruising intensity. There was no gentleness this time. No slow build. Only survival. Only the desperate understanding that whatever they were building, whatever fragile thing was sparking between them, was living on borrowed time. They broke apart only when the need for air became too great. Jack rested his forehead against hers, breathing hard. "We can't stay here," he said. "They'll find us again." "Then we keep running," Elara said. Jack's mouth curved into a sad, crooked smile. "Yeah," he said, "we keep running." But deep down, both of them knew. Running only delayed the inevitable, because secrets like theirs had teeth. And sooner or later, they always came back to bite. Chapter 7. The names we bury. They didn't stop until night fell. Elara and Jack moved through the city's veins like ghosts, hitching rides on freight trains, ducking into abandoned warehouses, staying low, staying invisible. By the time they found shelter, a forgotten motel on the edge of nowhere, Elara's muscles ached and her mind was buzzing with exhaustion. Jack paid in cash. No names, no questions. The clerk barely looked up from his newspaper. Their room was small, barely more than a sagging bed and a bathroom that smelled faintly of bleach and mold. But it had 4 walls and a door that locked, and right now, that was enough. Jack checked the windows, the locks, the exits, moving with mechanical precision. Only once he was satisfied did he allow himself to sink onto the edge of the bed, head in his hands. Elara sat beside him, close but not touching. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Finally, Jack broke the silence. "I was 19 when I ran for the first time," he said, voice low and rough. "Thought I could leave it all behind. Thought if I got far enough away, maybe the things I'd done wouldn't follow." Elara listened, heart thudding. "But they always find you," Jack said, "no matter how fast you run." He looked up at her then, and the rawness in his eyes nearly undid her. "You deserve the truth," he said, "even if it changes everything." Elara reached out, lacing her fingers with his. "Tell me," she whispered. Jack exhaled shakily. "My real name is Evan Cross," he said. "Used to work for a man named Vance. Dirty money, dirty jobs, things you don't ask about because you don't want to know." He laughed bitterly. "I was good at it. Too good. But eventually, I saw what it was doing to me, what I was becoming. So I walked away." He ran a hand through his hair, the gesture tired and broken. "Vance didn't like that. Nobody leaves clean. I've been running ever since." Elara squeezed his hand, grounding him. "And those men today?" "Vance's people, Jack," Evan said. "They're not just looking for me anymore. They're looking for leverage." His gaze locked onto hers, fierce and protective. "You're leveraged now." Elara swallowed hard. She wasn't naive. She knew what it meant. She was a target. Not because of anything she'd done, but because she mattered to him. The realization hit her like a fist to the gut. And yet, she didn't regret a single moment. Jack, Evan, wasn't the monster he thought he was. He was broken, yes. Damaged, yes. But so was she. Maybe that's why she understood him so well. Maybe that's why she was falling so fast, so hard. "I should tell you something too," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Jack turned to her, his whole body tensing. "My name isn't Ilara." Nip sounded smiled, a small, sad curve of his mouth. "I figured." Ilara drew in a shaky breath. "My real name is Calla Bishop." The name tasted foreign on her tongue. She hadn't spoken it out loud in months. "I was supposed to testify against someone," she said. "Someone powerful, dangerous. He killed my brother. I saw it happen. I was the only witness." Tears burned her eyes, but she blinked them back. "They offered me protection," she said. "A new life, new name. But it didn't work. They found me anyway. So I ran." She looked at him then, bearing every raw, jagged piece of herself. "I've been running ever since." Silence fell, thick and heavy. For a long time, Jack just stared at her. Then, without a word, he pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could hardly breathe. But she didn't mind. She didn't need that. She needed him. They stayed like that for what felt like forever, clinging to each other like two survivors, adrift at sea. When they finally pulled apart, Jack cupped her face in his hands. "No more lies," he said, voice rough with emotion. "Not between us." "No more lies," she echoed. He kissed her then, not with the hunger of the night before, but with a tenderness so fierce it made her chest ache. A promise and vow. They were no longer two strangers sharing a rooftop escape. They were two broken souls who had chosen each other despite the past, despite the danger, despite everything. For the first time in a long, long time, Elarath, Calla let herself hope. But even as she melted into Jack's arms, a dark whisper slithered at the edges of her mind. Hope is a dangerous thing, because in their world, hope could get you killed. Chapter 8. Into the Abyss. The night stretched long and quiet, the weight of their confessions still hanging heavily in the air between them. The room, once filled with frantic energy, now felt suffocating, as though it were holding its breath. Jack, Evan, lay beside her, staring up at the peeling ceiling, his chest rising and falling in slow, measured breaths. The quiet between them was comfortable, but it was also brittle, as if a single wrong word would shatter everything they had just built. Calla felt it too, the fragile thread between them. They both knew that the moment they let their guards down too far, the world would come crashing in. The world they had been running from. The world that would never let them go. "Do you ever think about just stopping?" Calla whispered, her voice barely audible in the dim light of the motel room. "Just giving up on all of it?" Evan turned his head to look at her, his eyes shadowed with something dark and heavy. "I think about it every day," he admitted, his voice low. "But then I remember that if I stop, if I let myself fall, I'll lose everything. Everything I fought for. Everything we have now." Calla turned to face him, her heart thudding in her chest. "We could leave," she said, her voice tentative, but filled with a kind of desperate hope. "We could go far away, somewhere no one knows our names. We could start over." Eben's lips twitched into a faint smile, but there was no humor in it. "You think that's possible? You think they'll just forget about us?" Calla's stomach churned. She knew he was right. No matter where they went, the past would follow. "Then what do we do?" she asked, her voice raw with the weight of their shared fear. "What's the plan, Evan?" He stared at her for a long moment, as if weighing his options, as if deciding whether to let her in on the truth that had been gnawing at him. "We fight," he said, his voice firm, We fight back. The words were cold and hard, but they were real, and they were exactly what she had expected from him. Kala's breath caught in her throat. How? How do we even start? Evan sat up slowly, his movements deliberate, as though he were pulling himself out of a fog of hesitation. His hands ran through his hair, and when he spoke again, his voice was steely with resolve. I have connections, he said, people who owe me favors, people who can help us take Vance down. Her heart raced as she processed the weight of his words. Vance Ben Van, the man who had been hunting them for months, the man whose reach extended far beyond anything she could ever have imagined. You want to go after him? She said, her voice trembling with disbelief. You want to bring him down? Evan's eyes locked onto hers, and there was something fierce in them, something that made her stomach tighten in equal parts fear and admiration. I don't want to fight, he said, his voice low and dangerous, but I won't run anymore. Not from him, not from anyone. There was a long silence, as though the room itself were holding its breath. Kala's mind raced, and her heart hammered in her chest. She had never seen him like this. Calm, controlled, but with the promise of violence simmering just beneath the surface. What about you? He asked, his voice suddenly softer, more vulnerable. Are you ready for this? Ready to face the man who's been chasing you? The man who killed your brother? Her throat tightened, but she refused to let the tears come. She refused to break. I don't have a choice, she said, her voice hardening with a steely edge. We fight. Together. No more running. Evan nodded, his jaw tightening as he seemed to weigh her words. We go after him tonight, he said, his voice firm. The longer we wait, the harder it'll be to get to him. I have a contact who can help us, but we don't have much time. Kala nodded, her pulse racing. There was no turning back now. But before they could make any more plans, the soft hum of her phone vibrated against the nightstand. Kala's heart stopped. It was a text message. She grabbed the phone with shaking hands and stared at the screen. I know where you are, and I'm coming for you. Van. Her blood turned to ice. Evan's eyes snapped to hers, reading the panic in her expression. It's him, she said, her voice hollow. He found us. Before Evan could respond, there was a sharp knock on the door. A single, quiet knock that made her blood run cold. Evan's face hardened, his jaw clenched. He stood, moving toward the door with a fluid grace, but the urgency in his steps betrayed the calm exterior he was trying to project. Get ready, he said to Kala. We have to move. Now! She grabbed her jacket and slid her gun into the waistband of her jeans. The room felt smaller, more suffocating, as she watched Evan prepare. He moved with the kind of cold precision that sent a shiver down her spine. He was no longer the man she had shared secrets with, the man she had kissed in the dark of the night. He was the man who had fought and killed and survived, the man who would do anything to keep her safe. But the question lingered. How far would he go? The knock came again, louder this time, a warning. Evan nodded toward the window. You go out the back. I'll handle this. She didn't hesitate. She couldn't. She made her way to the window, her heart racing in her chest. The fear was palpable, but so was the adrenaline. She knew this was it, the moment they had both been running from. And she knew that nothing would ever be the same again. Chapter 9. The Final Stand. The back alley was cold, and the air tasted like metal. Kala's heart pounded in her chest as she sprinted through the narrow space, the sound of her boots echoing against the cracked concrete. She didn't look back. She couldn't. Behind her, the faint sounds of the front door crashing open, a voice shouting her name, sent a surge of panic through her, but she pushed it down. She had to keep running. She had no idea what was happening inside the room. She couldn't afford to think about Evan, Jack. She couldn't let herself worry about him now. If she did, she would break, and they couldn't afford for her to break. The moment she rounded the corner of the alley, she nearly collided with a shadow. A hand shot out, grabbing her wrist with a firm grip. Her breath hitched, but then she looked up to find the familiar face of her contact, Lenny, a tech expert who had once been in deep with Vance's operations. Now, he was a whistleblower, a rat who had switched sides. "You guys, Enable, you're not supposed to be here," Lenny said in a low voice, his eyes darting around nervously. "This isn't part of the plan." "Get me to the escape route," Kala said, voice low but urgent. "Now." Lenny hesitated, his gaze flickering toward the motel. "They'll be looking for you," he warned. "You should have left with me earlier. They won't stop until they find you." "I'm not going anywhere without him," she snapped. "Take me to the escape route." Lenny frowned, but didn't argue. He turned on his heel, leading her through the back streets, moving quickly, keeping to the shadows. The city felt like a maze now, a trap closing in from every angle, and she was running out of time. Meanwhile, inside the motel room, Evan faced the door, his back to the wall. The knock came again, harder this time, and then the unmistakable voice of Vance, cutting through the silence. "You can't hide forever, Evan," Vance called, his voice smooth and chilling. "I know you're in there, and I'm not leaving until I get what I want." Evan's jaw tightened, the weight of his past crushing down on him. He had made it this far, running, hiding, surviving, but now everything was on the line. Kala was out there, vulnerable, and Vance was too close. "Get out of here, Vance," Evan growled, his hand resting on the cold metal of the door handle. "We both know how this ends." A low chuckle came from the other side. "You're delusional if you think you can walk away from this. You've always been mine, Evan, and you always will be." The door splintered with a violent crash, and Vance's men stormed inside, weapons drawn. Evan didn't flinch. "Get out!" he repeated, his voice cold with the promise of violence. He stepped into the center of the room, fists clenched, his body ready for the fight he had been avoiding for years. Vance emerged from the shadows, his tall frame looming in the doorway. "Always the hero," Vance sneered. "You've always had that look in your eyes. But you're not the hero, Evan. You're the villain. You always have been." Evan's lips curled into a smile that was all teeth. "You're not the first person to tell me that." Before Vance could respond, Evan lunged forward, knocking the first man off balance. The fight erupted in an explosion of violence. It was brutal, raw, everything Evan had been trained for, everything he had become in the years since he had left Vance's operation. But in the back of his mind, there was only one thing driving him now. Kala. Kala's feet felt like lead as Lenny led her through the labyrinth of alleys. She kept her pace steady, but the nagging feeling at the back of her mind wouldn't go away. Something was wrong. She could feel it. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She hesitated for only a second before pulling it out. "I hope you said goodbye." Her blood ran cold. He was getting closer. "Get me to the damn exit," she snapped at Lenny, her voice cracking with desperation. Lenny didn't argue. He pulled her toward a rusted steel gate at the far end of the alley. It was their last chance, but as they reached the gate, the sound of footsteps echoing behind them sent a cold shiver down her spine. Lenny turned, his face pale. "Go, now." But as he tried to move toward the gate, a figure stepped out from the shadows. Bank. Calla froze, every muscle in her body locking up. Easy. Did you really think you could escape? Vance's voice was smooth and dangerous. He was calm, too calm. He looked between Lenny and Calla, his eyes cold with satisfaction. Let her go, Lenny said, his voice trembling, the gun in his hand shaking. This is between you and me. Vance laughed softly, stepping closer to Lenny. You're not even a blip on my radar anymore, Lenny. But you're right about one thing. This is between me and Evan, and I don't like loose ends. In a flash, Vance grabbed Lenny by the throat, lifting him off the ground with ease. Calla screamed, rushing forward, but before she could make a move, Vance threw Lenny aside like a rag doll. Stay back, Vance warned, or she dies first. Calla's eyes burned with fury as she stepped closer, her hand trembling against the handle of her gun. You don't have to do this, she said, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her chest. Let him go. It's me you want. Vance smirked, his eyes gleaming with a cruel satisfaction. Oh, I've already won, sweetheart. It's over. You just don't know it yet. But as his attention shifted toward her, a loud crash echoed from behind him. Evan, Jack, appeared in the doorway, covered in blood, eyes wild with fury. Without a word, he charged forward, his fists connecting with Vance's jaw in a brutal punch that sent him sprawling back. Calla's breath caught in her throat as she watched the two men collide, fists flying, each one desperate to end the other. In the chaos, Calla didn't hesitate. She aimed her gun, her finger tightening on the trigger. One shot, one chance. The bullet found its mark, striking Vance in the shoulder. He howled in pain, falling back, clutching his wound. Evan, Jack, stepped forward, his eyes blazing. It's over, he said, his voice low and final. You're finished. Vance's eyes flickered with anger and defeat as he fell to the ground. But as the sirens wailed in the distance, Calla knew they weren't free yet. Let's go, Evan said, grabbing her hand. This isn't over, but we've won this round. Calla nodded, her chest tight with relief and something else, something deeper, darker. They ran together. End of chapter 9. The end.